it was serendipity. I was over in the Charles Center, and I ran into Sharon Zuber, who's a professor in the English department, film program, and writing center. And we were just chatting about nothing. And she said, "Hey, I have a student who wants to make a film, and she's interested in science." And I said, "Hey, I have a bunch of students that are going to be out in the field this summer with me, and they're doing something really interesting. Maybe she could just make a movie about them." And that is how it started. So we made that movie, and then we applied to the Reeves Center for funding to do an international teaching, learning group on Mercury from many perspectives. It was called a Global Inquiry Group. Well, we each just started talking to different faculty members about whether they were interested in Mercury at all. And it turned out there were about 8 or 10 people on campus who were really interested in Mercury. One, because they studied the history of mercury mining and how it had affected the settlement of South America. Another, because they're interested in using art to express feelings about environmental damage, and mercury is a famously nasty environmental pollutant. And another one was a chemistry professor who studied mercury. And interestingly, they ended up not really joining the group, even though they had perhaps the most interest. We had another marine biologist who was very knowledgeable about mercury and wanted to sort of expand the things that they think about. So we ended up with about 8 or 10 really active people coming from film, writing, English, art, and I was the only scientist other than the marine biologist from VIMS. Well, it's a very gradual process. That's a really good question. Uh, Literally, we had seed money to buy food, and that's how you do it. You bring people together around food, and you start talking, and there's no specific goal in the beginning, except we want to approach this from an interdisciplinary perspective. But then you start to see that there are different groups of people with shared interests, and there were several people who wanted to write a book about how you use mercury to teach interdisciplinarily. So it's not really about mercury, it's about teaching, but mercury's the common theme. And there's another group that's interested in film, and then it just grows and grows and grows as you bring students in. So then we applied for a bigger chunk of money that would fund student faculty groups around these themes that had arisen, which were art was a big one. And then just amazing things arose from that. But none of it was really planned out from the beginning, except let's bring people together. And then it, of course, spread well beyond campus after that. Sharon Zuber and I met constantly, and we had the group come together for the first year. I think it was once a month, and that was enough to give us some time to actually do the things that we talked about at the previous meeting. Once a week would have just been too much because people only have 1 foot in at the beginning. So we met once a month for a year, and at the end of that, we had planned out 2 trips to China, a whole series of ways to get people incentivized to create new classes on campus that had Mercury as a theme, or just a unit within a class about Mercury. Some of those classes lasted only a few years. Others are still in the curriculum. And so we touched a lot of students with the classes that were created for that. And some of the classes, 2 of them, were classes in which we brought in visiting speakers, and all the faculty were involved leading sections of students to discuss the visiting speakers. I think one of the main ways that we took a big leap from the campus to the entire community of the world was through organizing an international Mercury Expo as kind of our final big hurrah. And that brought in people from around the world. It was a big conference on campus, which involved theater, debates, straight up natural science, all kinds of things, film festival on Mercury. But there were people in the community whose only interest in mercury was whether the mercury in their fillings is causing them these long-term illnesses. And so we brought in a student completely on their own with some other students, organized a symposium of dentists who debated on both sides of the issue whether mercury could be causing these health problems. And we had a whole group of people from the community who were there to learn about that. That's really far from anything we started with, and it was student driven. The student was interested in dental school and had some contacts. That's one way in which it grew to just encompass a group of people in the community who are still out there today, who still send me emails when they find interesting things about whether their teeth are causing their illnesses. I think having at least two people in charge and not one is very important because you can feed off each other's strengths and hold each other accountable. So that may be part of it if you have a single director. We were very solid co-directors, and neither of us was interested in having more influence than the other, I don't think. So we've worked well together on other projects too as a team. So that accountability is important because a lot of these communities fall apart when no one knows exactly who's accountable for the follow through. And we had a lot of follow through with this. By luck, we had a very narrow and focused theme. Now it spread out into everything from what's in people's teeth to what's going on with the colonization of South America to how birds are doing in the environment to music, to art, etc. However, there was a very narrow theme. Now, if our theme had been something bigger like environmental justice or something, I don't think it would have worked as well because people would have been coming at it from farther apart. So I think a very, very, very narrow theme, even though it might strike people as too narrow, is probably the way to go. And so that's the first thing I think of. The other thing is I was terrified about several of our endeavors, that they would fail. And actually, they were magnificent and far outpaced my expectations. Don't let your fears of failure prevent you from trying some of these things. I knew the whole thing would be a success, but each of these pieces, some of them were so far out of my comfort zone that I just had this existential dread about them, and I should have just relaxed because they worked out wonderfully. So think big.